Hey guys, this is Jay, and I am super excited to share with you what I have on the table in front of me. Because unlike pretty much all of the other upgrade lowdown videos I've done for you all, this one is something where I figured it out myself. I did a lot of the fabrication myself, and I pieced together this whole kit to make it fit on my truck. So just starting with the beginning, ever since I did the upgrade lowdown video on the Economine tuner and Technicooler intercooler, when I pulled that van around all those times, my PCV system has been giving me issues. These trucks just have a tube that basically vents to the atmosphere. I'll show you more details later whenever I go over the installation of this kit. But I was having all kinds of oil get pushed out of there, and I'm tired of it. It's making a mess under there, and it just seems like there's a much better way to do a PCV system. So what I have in front of me is a highly modified Vibrant Performance universal closed loop catch can. I was turned on to this setup from an episode of the Power Driven Diesel YouTube channel where they were working on the Godfather truck, and they actually put 2 of these catch cans on there for that because that thing runs like 250 pounds of boost, and this truck's only running about 25. But that's still a lot more boost than what it had from the factory, and that means there's going to be more crankcase pressure because of that, and the factory PCV system cannot keep up with it. So after I saw that video, I reached out to Vibrant Performance and asked them to help me figure out this kit, and they suggested that I use the internal baffle because this has a little filter in here that's going to get all the oil vapor out of the crankcase gases to make sure that none of it is going into the intake, since this is closed loop. This will not be vented to atmosphere anymore. And one of the things that's really nice about this setup is that normally these catch cans just have a drain plug on the bottom, so as there's a dipstick that goes in the cap, and as they fill up, you just have to drain it out manually. But since I have the PPE oil pan on the truck, there is a 1/8 NPT port already tapped in that oil pan that was intended for an oil temp sensor. But what I'm going to be able to do is actually run a check valve on the bottom of this and then run a line down to the oil pan to where whenever I shut the truck off, any oil that has accumulated in here will drain back down into the oil pan. So it'll be a completely self-sustaining system, and I'm not going to have to, keep up with that dipstick and everything. So whenever I got this, it was both the catch can and the baffle were about 2 inches longer. I've got the pieces that I cut off right here. You can see how substantial of a cut I had to make to get this to fit. And so I talked with Vibrant, and they said that as long as you're not removing holes from this baffle, you're not going to have any trouble with this losing function. But this was just enough material removed from the catch can for it to fit in the spot I have picked out in the truck. These trucks, for as far as I can tell, all the way up until the current ones, they have provisions for a dual alternator mount, and so the bolt holes in the mounting bracket that came with it actually lined up. All I had to do was hog them out to 10 millimeter, and it'll bolt right up. So the main thing here is that, of course, when it comes from Vibrant, it's just this piece, and the bolt holes are actually right off the end of this. But to get this to fit in the truck, which I'll show you later, I had to add a substantial rise to it, and also had to move it out a little bit because this, with the check valve on it, is very close to the power steering pump. And with this bracket set up like this, not only is there no contact, the check valve is not rubbing on the back of the power steering pump, you can still get the cap off the power steering pump and check your fluid without having to move the catch can around. So to use this baffle, the catch can doesn't come with this baffle. You have to buy it separately. Initially, it's just 4 of the same fitting. 2 of them come in and 2 of them go out, and you can see how they're nice and flared to make sure the flow is nice and smooth. And there's a little baffle plate that's in there, but no filter capability. This baffle kit comes with these new fittings that have an actual O-ring seal on them, because this top plate here will mount to the top of the baffle like this, and then these O-rings, one of each, goes inside these holes right here, and that makes sure that all of the incoming crankcase gases through these fittings is forced to go through that baffle, to where none of it is left unfiltered, and that makes sure all the oil vapor comes out of it. And then on the top, the existing PCV system on the truck uses 5/8 line. So all I'm going to do is take the lines off of the breathers on the valve cover and then push them on to these fittings right here. These are -10 AN, and they'll just thread right onto these fittings like that, and it will be very easy to service and remove this if you ever need to, since this is going to have 4 additional lines running across the truck. To keep this closed loop, you have to put the output of the catch can to a source of vacuum, and so I have these 2 1/2-inch NPT to 5/8 hose barb fittings, and I'm actually going to drill and tap these into my airbox, and I'm using 2 of them because the factory PCV system wires together, so it starts out as 2 5/8 lines, and then they join together and run down to 1, and it goes to an oil separator and then out the bottom. I'll show all that on the truck as I remove it to prepare for this. But I want to make sure that this not only has more filtration because of this baffle, but that it has double the outlet capacity to make sure that all of the crankcase pressure that this extra boost produces, especially when I'm on level 6, has a place to go, and it's not backing up and pushing oil out or damaging seals or anything like that. So 2 of these hoses are going to run over and across the hood to the intake box, and the reason I'm doing it there and not to the inlet of the turbo is just in case anything comes through this catch can, I want to be sure that it's filtered. I don't want to risk anything coming out of this catch can and getting sucked right into the turbo. So putting them into the air box means that all of the vapors that come through the catch can will go through the air filter. And with this baffle, there shouldn't be any oil in there to damage the air filter or mass airflow sensor or anything like that. So this system should be very, very robust, and I'm very excited to show you the benefits once I get it installed on the truck. Alright, with the hood popped, hopefully you can see down in there under the charge pipe where the passenger side valve cover breather is. And moving on up, it's still going to be difficult to see. You'll be able to see this more clearly whenever I remove the charge pipes to do the installation. But the driver's side PCV line runs across, and they tee together just under the intake Y bridge, and then that runs across to this line right here that runs down the front of the engine, and the oil separator is hiding under the belt tensioner. And then once it goes to the oil separator, I'll show you in a minute the tube where it comes out on the bottom, and that's where I'm having all the oil accumulation problems. So over here on the driver's side, you can see this dual alternator bracket right here, and as I said, these holes lined up perfectly, and the catch can will live kind of in this area, and the check valve and that line running down to the oil pan will fit just down in here. It will block access to opening this, but since I have 2 batteries, there's plenty of places to get power and ground on this. So yeah, I'm very excited to remove the stock stuff and put the new stuff on. Up under the truck now, you can see how that tube runs down from the oil separator and then just vents into the atmosphere right there. And all that oil accumulation, which is just covering everything. I mean, it's all over my steering stabilizer and the steering linkage, and it's a real problem. It's making a complete mess, and this closed loop system, 1, should prevent oil from getting pushed out in the first place because the crankcase will be under a vacuum, but 2, any oil that does come out will get captured by that baffle and filtered out to go back to the oil pan. Alright, well, I just removed the factory PCV lines. You can see what I was talking about, how they Y together and then run down to the front. This is the piece that attached over here. You can also see that I've put a rubber plug on there. I'm not entirely sure if that's necessary, but I am going to cap off both ends of that line to make sure nothing comes in or out. By far, the hardest part of removing this was getting this passenger side spring clamp off. As you can see under there, there is very little room, and you've got got just enough space to get a some wide jaw pliers like that, and you can reach down in here with one hand and get them set. And if you have enough wingspan like I do, you can come across the front and grab the lines, which were right under here, and pull on it, and that will unseat the tube off of that side. And then to remove them, what you need to do is very carefully pull them out from under this connector right here. You'll be able to get the short stub tube off of this vent pulled over to this side, and then you can very gently pull them out. It will be tight up against this connector, so be sure you don't bind it too hard. But that being said, I worked them out gently and they did come out. Also, as you can see, I have both charge pipes removed from the truck. Just to be safe, I like to put a rag over the inlets and outlets and put the clamp back on, just to make sure as little stuff gets inside these as possible, since all of this is after the air filter. But once you get those out, you will have enough access to get to both of these. The driver's side one is much easier to get to because you can remove these connectors out of the way, and the spring clamp is very easily accessible right there. All right, I got the two lines ran over to the vents on the valve covers. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but there's just enough room in there to get a 5/16 socket on a worm drive clamp. It's so much easier to use those worm drive clamps than those stupid spring clamps that came on there from the factory. So I just ran that line back the way it came and ran it over to the far side of it. And I did that because the driver's side vent, which is right down here, would be a super short line to get it to come up to this one. So using this side, I can run a nice smooth bend down to this line here. So I'm really pleased with how this is turning out, and these do clear the hood insulation. It's hard to tell, but they're pretty much even with the radiator cap, and the radiator cap is much closer to the side of the hood here, and it still clears. So these being a little bit further out in the middle, even though there is some bracing up here, there's no marking on top of these fittings, so these are not an interference fit with the hood whenever the hood is closed. All right, I've got the Banks Power air box removed from the truck, and just looking at the side right here, this middle rib is going to be really accessible to these hoses, so I think I'm going to put both of those hose barbs in this top section of the middle rib. All right, I got the two holes drilled and tapped in the air box. My tap wasn't quite as straight as I wanted it to be, but they'll still work just fine. And this Banks Power air box was perfect because that rib kicks these inner threads out far enough away to clear the air filter, and there was just enough thickness to where they weren't hard to drill or tap, but there's plenty of meat there to get a good seal. I'm not even going to have to run Teflon on this. These got nice and tight, and they shouldn't go anywhere. All right, I got the two vacuum lines run, and you can see that those two fittings are perfectly clear of everything. The air filter still comes out nice and easily. You do not have to remove the lines to service the air filter, which is nice. That's one of the advantages of not putting them further up in this. Also, this AC line is a really nice tie-off point to keep the lines out of the serpentine belt, and you can see just how stiff this thing is. If I push it all the way down, they're still not even touching the belt, but it springs right up. There's very little weight on it. And I also had to turn the catch can just a little bit, and what that did was make both of these vacuum lines run straight out, rather than one of them having to come out and make a corner and the other one go straight. Turning the can about 45 degrees made these both run nice and straight across the front, and it didn't compromise anything here on the back with these two vent lines. Just got done running the oil return line down to the oil pan. It was really handy to have someone else up here with a shop vac, and it just so turns out that this standard slip fit hose connection locks inside this oil fill, and so as long as someone's up here keeping pressure on it, you can pull the 1/8 NPT pipe plug out of the bottom of the oil pan, and the vacuum will keep any oil from coming out. It actually tried to suck the plug back in. It was so good. I'll show you the setup on the oil pan next, but it works out really well to have the hose reel up here with the line pre-run down through all this rat's nest of wiring here exactly the way you want it. And then whenever you get the plug out, you can put the hose barb with the pipe fitting into the oil pan, and then have a hose clamp ready on this and slide the hose over. Here's the setup under the truck with that 1/8 NPT port coming out of the PPE oil pan. You can see that I have the line zip tied to this cross member here to keep it from having any chance of blowing up into the prop shaft. The oil filter for the truck would usually be right up here, but since I have this AMSOIL bypass filtration kit, I have all these lines up here, but you'd still have plenty of access to your oil filter. I just zip tied the oil drain back hose to this chassis wiring harness right here, which again keeps this loop from having any chance. I mean, I've got to pull on it extremely hard to just get it even to touch the prop shaft. So I imagine this would just get outright ripped off before it got pushed up into the prop shaft. But yeah, just using that vacuum, I was able to take out that pipe plug and tighten in the hose barb and slip the hose over it with the hose clamp, and not a drop of oil is on the ground. Up in the fender well now, I've got that oil line again zip tied to this chassis harness right here to keep it away from the exhaust manifold and steering shaft. And then I also have it zip tied to this harness right here, and you can see this kind of, you know, loop of hose, and that's so that if you ever need to remove the catch can, you have a little bit of play in this hose to be able to lift the catch can up and out of the way without having to undo this hose clamp. And once you get it out of the way, you can then take that AN fitting off the bottom to separate it from this line. Here's how that top plate goes onto the baffle. As you can see, those O-rings are down inside each one of those openings, and that's what seals the two vent lines to make sure all the gases go through this. Another thing to note, what I've learned unfortunately the hard way from my remote control trucks, is that these little tiny screws that you're tightening into aluminum need to have Loctite on them. They will vibrate loose otherwise. So I'm going to take all these out and tighten them down with Loctite. One thing that I forgot to mention in the intro is that every single fitting and component of this kit is from Vibrant Performance, except for this female -8 O-ring boss to 1/8 NPT adapter. I got that from Radium Engineering. But outside of that, literally everything except the hose came from Vibrant Performance. And it's all top-notch billet aluminum stuff, super light, super high quality. It's going to be great. One thing to note about these Vibrant Performance check valves is that they do have an adjustment collar on the inside for a spring that can preload the ball bearing. For something where you would have legitimate pressure on the other side that could unseat the ball bearing, then you would want to put some preload in it. But for what we're doing here, since this is only going to have oil on the other side of it, no pressure, you want to make sure that this collar is backed off enough to where the slightest vacuum on the ball bearing will seat it and shut off the flow, but you don't want to have the ball bearing stay seated whenever the vacuum goes away so that the oil can drain. Because if that ball bearing is still seated up against the check valve, then even if the engine shuts off, the oil will not be able to drain. Well, I finally got everything installed on the truck. All the lines are in place and all the fittings are tight, and this bracket is tightened down and it is extremely rigid. I mean, there's hardly any flex in this, and I am so pleased with how this turned out. As you can see with the blue towels, pretty much all that's left is to put the charge pipes back on, reconnect the computers, and we'll be able to fire this thing up and see how much different it runs with the crankcase pressure coming through this catch can instead of that stupid hose and oil separator like it was before. All right, we've got everything put together and the truck is running, and hopefully you can hear it, but the ball bearing in that check valve is fluttering at idle. So what you'll want to do is adjust the preload collar in there with the truck running to make sure the ball bearing doesn't flutter. It's funny, as I was talking, it stopped doing it, but I'm still going to adjust it a little bit more. But other than that, once you get it all together, it's ready to go. Be careful while you're adjusting this preload collar though, because if you leave it on the engine without the oil drain line in the bottom of this, that collar will back off and fall out, and then you'll be hard pressed to find that spring and ball bearing. Ask me how I know. I got extremely lucky that I found mine. But just be diligent to keep an eye on that and all will go well. Because that preload spacer backed off in the check valve, I just put some M10 washers on a little bolt that I'm using as a mandrel in my drill, and I'm just kind of machining them down with a sandpaper disc on my die grinder here until they fit down inside that check valve. So that way, whenever I tighten the O-ring boss fitting adapter for the oil drain line, that collar won't be able to back off any. Just like that, we've got some nice preload spacers to put inside this check valve here. Of course, I'm not going to need to use all 5 of them, but it's nice to have more than I need just in case. Since I've already dropped stuff in the engine bay once, if I drop these, I've got more. Alright, well I fiddled around with the preload on that check valve for a little bit. I settled on 2 of those washers in there as preload spacers, and you might be able to hear it. It'll still flutter just a little bit at idle, but it's nowhere near as bad as it was. So the installation is complete, everything is installed, and I am already super pleased with this, because if I take this oil cap off and turn it upside down, it does slide around just a little bit, but if you get it in place, it doesn't move. I mean, it's spinning, but before it would do a little dance where it was like flopping up and down like that. And the only thing I have changed is this catch can. So, I mean, I think if I pinch off one of these lines, let's see if it starts moving around. Yep, so I've pinched off one of the lines. I don't know if you can see it, but it's starting to hop a little bit now. And if I let go, it stops. Let me try the driver's side valve cover. Yep, now it's hopping again. So clearly there was something in the original PCB system that was not letting it flow enough to regulate the crankcase pressure. Because whenever I would take the oil cap off, it would flop like that. It never blew it completely off, thankfully, but it would do that steadily the whole time. So I'm going to take it out on the road and see if this fixes some of the other problems that I've been having with this truck since that Economine video. Stay tuned for that. With the truck out on the road now, it's immediately apparent that this new catch can has made a tremendous difference, because everything is smoother. The shifts, it drives smoother. I mean, I still have trouble with the 1-2 shift. Every now and then it'll kind of hang in first gear, but I mean, most of these shifts are so smooth and quick that you don't even feel them. I mean, you hear them because it's a straight pipe, but you don't feel them. And this truck is so smooth. And the biggest thing that I was concerned about, especially given, you know, my branding, is that whenever I turn the power up, this truck would start to smoke whenever I'd stay in it for a while. And so, since it's smoking, I knew something was broken. And I was looking through the PCB system, and with the oil cap fluttering like that at idle, I knew there had to be something wrong with the PCB system, because the way this engine pulls, even with that PCB system, there's no way that crankcase pressure was coming from damage to the engine. And so I am so thrilled with how this is driving right now, and it seems to be more powerful than it was before, because, I mean, just talking theory here, if crankcase pressure builds up, then that will start to unseat the piston rings the more pressure builds up. And so if those rings were indeed unseating, then that means that the smoke at the top end was coming from lack of ring seal and lack of combustion efficiency. It just couldn't burn all the fuel that was going into the cylinder anymore because the rings weren't sealing well enough. But now with this closed loop system, if that turbo spooled up, then there's going to be a significant vacuum put on the PCB system that should be more than able to keep up with the amount of gases coming from the additional boost. And I believe that's what's happening. I've got a car in front of me right now, but I'm going to floor it and see if there's any smoke that comes out. It doesn't want to. It started to haze just a little bit there. This spot right here is where I filmed that shorts video at night when I was going over the build that I had done on this. So I'm going to stay in it here and see if any smoke happens at the top end. Very clean, and before, if I stayed in that, one, it wouldn't be anywhere near that powerful. That's a big improvement. But two, there would be a pretty heavy cloud of smoke coming from the tailpipe, and it's clear that this has really cleaned it up. Turbo spool. There's a little bit of haze there. It's nowhere near as bad as it was. It's nowhere near as bad as it was. It's still letting out a little bit, but also this Economine is not static tuning. It's not like a DSP-5 where turning up the knob is a set tune that the computer runs at all the time. The Banks module is tricking the factory computers, untuned factory computers, into making a lot more power than they normally would. And that tuner was meant for a truck that does not have all the upgrades that mine has. I mean, that tuner came in a power pack with the intercooler, air intake, and exhaust, and that's it. Anything beyond that, this tuner was not designed to handle. So the fact that I have manifolds, up pipe, down pipe, turbo, I mean, this tuner is working with a lot more power potential than Banks Power originally intended, and it's doing extremely well. I'm very pleased with it. Here's another power pool. That was 70 miles an hour. I mean, that was 45 miles an hour. We're going 45 miles an hour. Always. Except back there, that was 55. Man, it feels great to have this truck back to what honestly feels like even more than it had originally. I really can't believe how much of a difference this catch can has made. I mean, I was hoping that it would control the crankcase pressure and not push oil out all over the underside of my truck. But to have this much power back and cleanliness of exhaust, I'm thrilled. And you know, I've only had it on the truck for like 2 days, so I can't speak to long-term fuel efficiency, but that had also plummeted as well. Like my fuel efficiency, the best I ever got after I installed the Economine was about 17 miles a gallon, and I was seeing, the best I've seen since then was like 13. It's been really bad. Some of that could be because I hadn't serviced my brakes in a while, and I think the front ones especially were dragging. So I've also fixed that, so that should increase fuel economy there. But I think quite a bit of that loss in fuel economy was because the piston rings were unseating. And yeah, if this improves the efficiency in the same way that it has improved the power, then this is going to be getting even better mileage than I got before. And I will be able to tell you all that in a later video. But for now, the power and crankcase pressure management is exactly what I wanted. I'm so happy with it. Here is one last real quick power pull. All this is with the AC on, by the way. Again, it's just starting to haze a little bit, but it's so much cleaner than it was before. It might even be completely clean if I didn't have the AC on. That might be messing with it. All right, we just got back from that spirited drive. Let me take the oil cap off and see how we're doing on crankcase pressure. Doing great. There's a little bit of a dance, but it is not flopping around at all. I can pinch off the line and then it starts dancing. Try the other one. Yep, there it goes. But if I let off the line, it stays still. I mean, it's spinning around a little bit, but the crankcase pressure is completely under control. Well, I know this has been quite a long video, but since this is something that I largely came up with, I wanted to make sure you all had all the details in case you wanted to try to replicate this on your truck. I can put a complete parts list for what I got off of Summit Racing, all the Vibrant Performance parts and the hose that I used. But I also wanted to mention that I think it would be awesome for me to actually start making these, like not taking an existing catch can and cutting it down, but actually making a catch can and bracket specifically for these trucks, because I don't think anyone on the market has a catch can set up for these trucks. It's meant for a quote-unquote factory application. I mean, there's plenty of people like with compound turbos and stuff like that that run catch cans, but that's way beyond what I'm wanting this to be for. So if you are interested in having a custom fabricated kit for your truck, let me know. I mean, if I get enough interest from this, then I'll start tooling up. I'll make jigs and fixtures to do this properly. I know the welding wasn't the best, but those were literally my first actual TIG welds. I mean, I've done a little bit of practice before that, but those were largely the first real TIG welds I've ever done, and I didn't have any fixturing. I mean, I was having to get super creative with magnets and all kinds of stuff to be able to get those parts to line up, and I had to cut apart existing things to do that. So if there's enough interest, then I will invest in all of the fixturing necessary to have proper jigs for this and get really nice fit up and clean welds, and I'll make kits and send them out. So I'm very excited for the possibility of that, and if that's something you all would be interested in, let me know in the comments. I also have my channel email posted in the About section, so feel free to reach out to me there in more detail. But yeah, I'm extremely pleased with this, and I think anyone with these trucks can benefit from this. You don't have to have all the additional power like I have, but certainly if you have turned up the power on your truck, then the PCV system could be causing you problems, and this is a much better way to do it than what some people do, which is just reroute that to where it dumps all the oil behind the transmission. So yeah, if you are interested in this kit as something I make for you specifically for these trucks, let me know. Like I said, I believe all of the trucks, even up to the current ones, have this dual alternator provision. The newer ones with the EGR and all that stuff, it's going to be even harder to get to those valve cover vents, but they should all still be there, and they should all still be 5/8. So that's another thing. If you know for sure, like if you have a newer truck, let me know what size those vents are, and if you have a dual alternator bracket like that. And if you do and you want one of these kits, I'll make one for you too. This isn't just for the LB7. This could be for every single Duramax pickup variant, as long as you don't have a dual alternator installed. So I really hope this was a good video for you all to watch, and I really appreciate you staying tuned to the channel. So thanks for watching, and remember, if it's smoking, it's broken.